The moment you own dollars, you are placing a bet on them. When you hold the dollar, you're long on the dollar. It's like holding Bitcoin, but you're long on that. And you think it's pegged 1-to-1 when really it's being printed out of thin air.
I'm the youngest billionaire in the world right now. Like liquid billionaire, no, I'm not a liquid billionaire yet. Probably will be mathematically soon.
If you're a guy in your 20s and you don't have a Lamborghini, you should actually sit down and have like a serious discussion with yourself as to why you don't have a Lambo.
What?
YouTube, TikTok, Instagram are full of financial advice usually from young kids selling you an online course about financial advice, which is pretty hilarious.
Many analysts, including myself, believe that.
But what is financial advice that most people don't tell you that is still probably true? In this video, I'm going to cover 5 things that I personally felt to be true, but seem counterintuitive. And hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Tero. I grew up pretty poor on a farm in Finland and have traveled around the world building businesses and made wealth along the way. And I did not get financial advice, although I later studied, I had an MBA and whatnot, not that helpful by the way, and have learned through the hard way of financial advice and financial literacy, both being an early adopter in the FIRE movement, well over 15 years ago, but also building businesses in Europe, Asia, and the US. By the way, even though I was a little bit critical of the YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok financial advice, I do see the value of getting financial advice from free platforms like these, because let's face it, the US and the world economy is not in a great shape. I made another video about the FIRE movement. You can check it out here. But there's like a lot of issues. A lot of people don't have funds to retire, and a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're in debt early on. So I do see the value of you spending time educating yourself on the topic, but I also do think that a lot of people giving the advice don't actually have real life experience, or they're trying to sell you a course. In this case, I'm not trying to sell you anything here. First advice is that no matter how tempting it is, if you have little money, do not invest. You'll see people promoting, be it Bitcoin, they'll see promoting different kinds of new businesses, this and that. But like, if you have little money, and little can depend where you live and what's your expense ratios, but definitely if you have less than $10,000, you should probably save for a rainy day. And probably this is actually true until you can at least 3 months, probably 6 months of your expenses you have saved up. And if you have a little more, let's say instead of like 10, 20,000, you have 30, 40,000, I would almost recommend you investing in yourself and skills and ways to increase your income first. And a lot of people are tempted to start investing small. And they're like, hey, just put in like a little bit along the way and compounding interest. And they quote Warren Buffett and It's like by the age of 60, you'll be a millionaire. And that's all kind of true, but life is surprising. It's not linear. There are surprises why this emergency fund is so critical for health and happiness. Also, when you don't have the leverage yet, it's probably better to save and then invest in your own growth and income. And once you have a little more leverage, then investing makes a lot more sense. But what is counterintuitive is if you have very little, don't invest. Just build an emergency fund and invest in yourself and growing your income. And then from there, eventually you can graduate into investing. Disclaimer, by the way, situations are unique, obviously, but this is generalizations of for most people at most cases. But yeah, there's always an exception to every rule. Secondly, these are my personal experiences and opinions. I'm not a financial expert. And I mean, I wouldn't trust that many financial experts, but yeah, I'm not one either, so don't trust me either. Make your own decisions. And finally, time is money. So you all have to know where you are in your financial journey to know what makes sense for you, because in a lot of cases, initially you are trading time for money until, you know, your challenge will be that you have a lot of money, but less time. Secondly, never calculate based on monthly costs. Try to always look at full out the door price. So if you're buying, let's say, a car, like try to figure out what's the full out the door price. Do not try to focus on the monthly cost, be it leasing or debt or whatever. Same goes for pretty much any larger purchase, like including mortgages. Like really try to look at the total number. Obviously, you got to work through the cash flow as well, but a lot of people focus on the monthly numbers and what they can afford, and that is what gets them into debt, especially here in the US. Another controversial and counterintuitive thought is that even if you're so frugal, you can still get into debt. Yes, you can get into debt even if you're frugal. Now, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. That's why it is counterintuitive. Like if you spend less than what you make, you will never be in debt. So mathematically, that makes sense, but life is not linear. What if you get into an accident? That is why the emergency fund is so important. You might find yourself in debt or your health is in complete jeopardy. There are also a lot of cases, be it lawsuits and other things that can happen, and you can still end up in debt. There are a lot of people who were frugal their whole life and ended up in debt. That's why a lot of cases, if you are tight with finances, you can stay tight with expenses, but really your focus should be on growing the top line income and your earnings, and then eventually manage from there. Buying a house and going to college are not for most people. For the last many decades, we've been sold this dream of buying a house, and you should buy a house and it's your best investment. We've also been sold the dream of colleges. Now, granted, now TikTok is full of people who say don't buy a house or don't go to college. And both extremes are wrong. The more traditional advice of going to college and buying a house is not for most people, but also colleges and buying a house are for some people. I bought multiple houses and I made money on some and I've not made money on some. The general rule of thumb is like, do not buy a house unless you see yourself there for at least 5 years, ideally 10 to 20. The closing cost and the issues there, just purely mathematically doesn't make sense to get one. It's very risky investment, and a lot of your profits will be diluted if you move out or sell the place before 5 years are over. Secondly, when you buy a house, you are trading a lot of freedom in order to grow your income and get certain job opportunities. So in a way, like it is not for most for that reason either, and that they probably get a better return for their investment somewhere else. And the headaches that come with being a homeowner is also pretty dramatic, and it's away from something. So owning a home is not for everyone. There are tax benefits there that some other investment classes don't have. Taxes are kind of like the government's incentive structure to build an economy they like. They like people having a home, then you stay in your area and pay your taxes, yada, yada, yada. So there are tax incentives to being a homeowner. Therefore, if you're smart about it, you buy the right size home and you're willing to keep it for a long time. And especially if it's a primary residence, 2 years of the last 5 years when the time of selling, there's really good tax breaks. In that case, it's probably a good investment. Also, if you're like completely wasting money all the time, forcing you to save through that mortgage might actually be one of the best parts about buying a house. And the same with college is like, it's not for most, but if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or things like that, you probably need to do that. AI will replace a lot of education, including a lot of legal, paralegal work. But even if you want to pass the bar and be a practicing lawyer, you probably need to go to school. So it is for some people, but the cost of education in America compared to the value is way off. And owning a home, buying an expensive car, and go to college are the biggest investments most people make, and they're also the dumbest investments people make. But also don't listen to people who say never buy a house. Nobody should go to college. There are exceptions where it makes a lot of sense. If you do end up going to college or you end up buying a house, paying back the mortgage or the student debt early might not be smart. If you are not financially wise at all, then yeah, maybe having debt is not the best. But if you know even the fundamentals of using money, that debt is probably the best debt you can get. Obviously right now, as we're filming it, interest rates are pretty high, but if you take a longer time span, you're probably using the extra free-flowing cash to other purposes is probably a better use of time than paying back the mortgage or the student debt early. Now, if you're wasted on clothes and other materialism and other things like that, then maybe not so much because, yeah, you're wasting basically. But if you can have low interest debt and you're smart about it, that's probably good in the balance sheet. Usually a lot of wealthy people have a lot of debt and they're just like smart debt, so to say. As a side note, I grew up in Finland where the more debt you had, the worse your credit score was. Then I moved to America, where the more debt I had, the better credit score I had. And that was a real mind F. And it took me a while, so I had to force myself to get into debt to get a better credit score, which was kind of gnarly and stupid. Both systems have their pros and cons, but I'm definitely more generally leaning towards the Finnish system. But if you do have favorable debt, it's also not negative or that scary at the end of the day. Did I miss on another counterintuitive financial advice that makes sense to you? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the content, subscribe, and hope to see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.